Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, everyone. I'm Preeti Daruka, one of the founders and global coordinator for BRICS Feminist Watch, and it is a pleasure to welcome all of you on this online seminar, Women and Multilateralism. The partnering organization for today's event, along with BRICS Feminist Watch, are PWESCR, the Global Afro-Descendant Climate Justice Collaborative, Haiyi Foundation, and the Heinrich Böll Stiftung India office. I, along with my dear friend Anuradha Chinoy, will be moderators for today. And before I hand over to Anu, I just wanted to take a few minutes to set the context for the conversation. As you all know, the idea and structures of multilateralism as a legitimate system emerged in post-World War world. Unfortunately, this also emerged as systems that institutionalize many forms of discrimination, including gender inequality. These systems were continue to be based on colonial narratives, that is, West knows the best, and favored the global North. These systems in leadership and in agendas do not represent the world today in terms of population or economies. The multitude of recent global crises and the failure of existing global systems to address them have further highlighted the gaps, the limitations of these institutions and platforms. One relatively unexamined aspect within this structure is, of course, gender. Empirical evidence, especially from the global south, show that women's engagement does result in sustainable solutions and mitigating various conflicts. I'm sorry, my computer just jumped. Mitigating various conflicts, terrorism, unequal gender impacts of climate change, etc., require full and equal and meaningful participation of women. Multilateralism has generally failed to include the impacts of global crisis on non-traditional forms of security, which include livelihoods, natural resources, environment, etc. And this is what women from the global south are most dependent on and hence most vulnerable to. The inclusion of corporations into multilateral governance structure and processes have undermined and weakened accountability of private finance and government and have diluted laws and processes that ensure human rights and justice. Additionally, civil society, including feminists, especially from the global south, continue to be shut out of decision-making spaces within these structures. Shrinking civil society spaces within multilateral platform is a growing concern, and this is further coupled by systemic failure to protect the rights and safety of frontline human rights defenders, including indigenous peoples, feminists, journalists, land activists, etc. Further, challenging with serious funding gaps, especially for gender equality agenda, in contrast to massive military investments. The representation of women, marginalized geographies, and groups in the decision-making bodies of multilateral institutions and platforms remain underwhelming. There is therefore a critical need to rebuild and reimagine current systems of multilateralism beyond superficial reforms. Over the years, feminist discourse with international relations has qualitatively enriched the field of multilateralism by pushing for gender mainstreaming in agendas of these institutions. This engagement has resulted in, for example, CEDAW in 1979, Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action in 1995, the UN Security Council Resolution 1325, etc., etc. However, the crisis we are witnessing in terms of conflicts in Palestine, Congo, Sudan, the devastating impacts of gender apartheid in Iran, Afghanistan, and the escalating climate and debt crisis have also highlighted the fact that gender equality for all continues to be unattainable. Women's participation and leadership are crucial to the reimagining, restructuring, and operational success of multilateralism. However, the progress for women of the global south in multilateralism has been a slower and uneven process. In the past decade, the process of giving a gender lens to multilateralism in the global south appears to gather speed with women's movement all over, taking forward this agenda. Feminist movements, girls, women, adolescents in all their diversities are coming together to forge collective vision and to rebuild trust in multilateral systems. Difficult and necessary conversations are happening on the ground in communities, nationally, regionally, to challenge current structures and systems, practices, to reshape them with a decolonial, intergenerational feminist vision. The objective of this webinar is to offer a sharp Global South feminist critique of multilateralism as it exists in its current structure, and to amplify voices from the Global South and to propose a feminist vision for multilateralism. We will be capturing today's webinar conversation as a publication, which will be made public in the coming weeks. And before I hand it over to Anu, I just quickly wanted to go over some of the ground rules for the event today. The webinar will be divided into two sections. Phase 1 will have 2 panelists and phase 2 will also have 2 panelists. We'll have Q&A and sharing of comments from the audience in the middle and towards the end. So please, I request you use the chat, put down your thoughts, questions, comments, so that we can have an engaged conversation throughout the webinar. Each presenter will have 7 to 8 minutes to make their initial intervention. Unfortunately, the webinar will be in English. I apologize. There is no translation, unfortunately, as I said. I would request everyone to keep your mics muted if you're not speaking. The detailed bios for each presenter will be shared in the chat just in the interest of saving time. The webinar is video recorded, which will be shared in various social media platforms. And in case if you have any objection to that, do let us know and we'll respect that. Okay, now I would like to invite Anuradha Chinoy, and just to briefly introduce her, Anu has retired as a professor and dean from the School of International Studies at JNU in Delhi, and she is a well-known analyst of international relations. Anuradha, I hand over the mic to you.
Thank you, Preeti, and welcome to all our very eminent speakers and to all those who have joined. Many had registered and they want to get the recording to listen to this in their own time. And we all are looking forward to all our excellent speakers. Preeti has already given an introduction, and there's no need for me to give any more explanation. So I would first ask Lucy Niu from China, and her CV will be up in our chat. So Lucy, 8 minutes in this first round, and then you can take questions later.
Thank you. Distinguished friends from Global South, we meet again. I'm Lucy from Beijing, China. I'm the Executive Director for Haiyi Institute and the Research Center for Pacific Studies, Beijing Foreign Studies University. My shared topic today, Women of the Global South and Multilateral Governance, China's Practice. For so long, the voice of Southern women have been ignored and misrepresented in global forums. So yet, today, the situation is still going on because the Western media power is too strong to cover a majority voice of the world. So today, we are getting together. The Global South women, we discuss how those narratives are being reshaped and how China is partner with the Global South to be represented into co-governance with Global South countries, a shift that prioritizes agency, equality, and shared prosperity. To address these two issues, China approach to root it in two principles. One is for reshaping global agendas to center Southern women's priorities, and the second to deepen South-South cooperation to build tangible capacity. It is not from top-down solution. It's a partnership in win-win situation, especially China effort on focus on three pillars. One is voting for gender equality in multilateral areas such as UN, BRICS, and G20 to invite fighting commitment. Second, to enabling empowerment through development cooperation like project and Belt and Road Initiative that delivers tangible benefit to such to South women. And the third, partner in knowledge co-production to challenge EU-central feminism and elevate Southern women's lived experience as the evidence. And about the project and Belt and Road Initiative, it's improving the Southern women's livelihood. For example, the schools. China provide aid and those some of the business project to help in building schools facilities in Kenya and Laos and other developing countries to reduce the schoolgirls to drop out the rate. And they, for those poor countries, the girls, they travel too long to get to go school, but they still insist because they have their dream to be one day to become independent women. So they still very much insist to get to have a long travel to get education. But China help in aid to build schools, so the girls can be easily, they can get education just in their village, and a hospital to lower the rate of the women death. In those especially rural area, those women, they got the illness. Sometimes it's emergency, so they can't get immediately treatment. So some of the women just died without anyone to know sometimes. So China provide aid for those countries in build a hospital and provide facilities, and also the Chinese doctors go there to help. And digital assets. This is enable South women to have the digital tools and knowledges to help them to launch their own e-commerce ventures. So this can increase the women's income by it's easier. It's no need heavy labor. It's easier for women to get into the business. And about the capacity of training and governance experience sharing. In empowering also request building long-term capacity. China training progress support 4,000 female officials, and also for the entrepreneurs to the small and media entrepreneurs from 70 countries. This year-long program covers public policies, climate change, and smart agriculture, etc., and also cover finance, equipment. Women, so with the skill to drive change at local and national levels. And about the partner in knowledge cooperation, the colonizing feminist the narratives. this I will brief, very brief. Everyone know about this, and we have do something for indigenous knowledge system, and multilingual media and publications and open data platform. I'm so limited. Okay. Now we about towards a new paradigm, inclusive, multilateral for all. China's long-term goal is to build a new paradigm of multilateral governance, one where thousand women's voice are not just heard, but all central to decision-making. To achieve this, we are advancing 3 key initiatives. In the conclusion, we say think of multilateralism as the lively garden. Every 1,000 women's idea diverse to grow. This new paradigm ensures no one is reduced to a stereotype or a token. Everyone from global South women is to seen, is to heard, and is to empowered to lead. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lucy, for opening, giving a framework and telling us about China. Our next speaker is Shalmali Gotel from Focus on the Global South, but she's also the a rapporteur for the United Nations, and she'll explain what she also does because she's so active in Cambodia and Laos on food security, and she has experience being part of the UN system right now. Shalmali?
Thank you very much, Anu. And can you all see me and hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay, yeah. So firstly, a big thank you to the organizers for inviting me to share my perspectives. And I want to start my presentation today with a message of congratulations and solidarity to women fisher folk all over the world. The World Forum of Fisher Peoples, WFFP, has declared November 5 as International Fisher Women's Day. They've prepared also a document that if it's okay with the organizers, I would like to share in the chat after my presentation, and then I urge all of you to read it. So now what I would like to do actually is share some of the critical reflections that I have on women and multilateralism based on my experience as an analyst with focus on the Global South. I am indeed on the working group for UNDROP, the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Peasants and other working people in rural areas, but I'm not speaking in that role. I'm speaking as a focus analyst. So I will share some information about that at the end of the webinar, just to save time. No. So first, let me just start by saying that what is bad for women is bad for the world and nature. But patriarchy perpetuates the lie that what is good for the world is also good for women. And patriarchy traverses, of course, every political, economicism, every level and aspect of our lives. We often make the links between patriarchy and capitalism, which is there, but patriarchy is there in communism, in socialism as well. I mean, Anu mentioned Laos. So, for example, when structural adjustment programs were imposed in Laos and staff positions had to be cut, it was a conscious decision to cut women, despite their seniority in ministries, because of patriarchy and because of the cultural idea that if a man loses his job, it's worse for the ego, but if a woman loses her job, it's okay. She'll find other work and she'll take care of the family anyway. Similarly, across many of the Southeast Asian countries, especially those that went into early communism, women's labor in the field and in construction and other was counted less than men's labor. So they had a very complex system of gradation. So women only, so when you had those points and chits that you got, women's labor got fewer chits. I mean, this is entirely it ignores the treatise of the family written by Engels. It completely ignores, of course, the whole issue that women are producers of life. It's not only reproductive care work, but, to do any kind of work is the production of life. So, patriarchy is there in every ism that we have, no? And multilateral processes and agendas basically reflect realities at national levels. After all, governments who are representing sovereign nations, as they say, they form the multilateral system and its regional articulations, whether it's ASEAN, the Community of Latin American Caribbean States, whether it's the European Union, and so on. So when political agendas for negotiation in these spaces are already set through patriarchal lenses and patriarchal structures and systems, I don't see how women's participation can automatically render them gender equal, unless we participating in those spaces have the capacity and opportunity to radically change power asymmetries. We end up winning concessions, and those concessions are victories of a kind. I'm not throwing them all out, but we do not change fundamentally the ideological and material interests that have set these agendas. So when I look at the processes happening in ASEAN, in BRICS, in the past we had SARC, we don't have that anymore, and other, even South-South cooperation platforms. I don't see genuinely transformative processes. See development agendas, which are more or less business as usual, and which do actually, in the longer term, disempower and dispossess and displace women from political agency and autonomy for precisely the reason that they're not actually changing the material and ideological interests from where these agendas are coming up. Now, this is also complicated further by the rise of fascist and political, very conservative political regimes across our, not just Asia, but across the world, in fact. And these regimes do not support universal values of human and women's rights or gender equality and secularism. So again, then what our national representatives in these regional and multilateral spaces are bringing with them those perspectives, of extremely conservative values. Now, I know I have only 5 minutes more, so I'm going to race through it. Sorry, lucky because there is no interpretation, so I don't have to worry about interpreters. I think the concept of multilateralism is facing a huge crisis of legitimacy for a number of reasons. Not only has it failed to deliver on promises of justice and reparations and equality, equity, and well-being and peace, but also it has actually subverted many of these promises and values. And by this subversion, the continuing domination of global governance by wealthy countries who are the former colonizers, it's almost presented as a virtue. The sort of West is best thing that Preeti already talked about a little bit. But I'd just like to add that this bizarre situation has been enabled by economic and financial globalization, where markets are considered almost sacrosanct, and they're protected from messy social and environmental realities such as hunger, unemployment, violence, especially violence against women, environmental destruction, exploitation, trafficking, and so on. And for many of you who are listening and maybe may know about, we've seen what's happened with structural adjustment and austerity policies that were imposed by the World Bank and the IMF. These were justified in the language that national debts need to be repaid and that countries should not be spending beyond their means. And this continues to now. This crime continues today, So economies, food systems, environment, societies are being devastated by external debt, which now includes private creditors. But the multilateral system has no ethical or just or fair system to address this crisis. And finance capital has become so powerful with sophisticated and opaque financial instruments. And again, there are no binding multilateral measures to regulate financial markets, to stop speculation, and to prevent the concentration of wealth through predatory sort of capital. And then we see similar thing, green grabbing, blue grabbing in the climate crisis, and in these multilateral strategies for addressing climate change. Now, one of the most disgraceful failures of multilateralism, I think, is its failure to stop wars, occupations, crimes against humanity and genocide. And again, on the contrary, there's this weird subversion of these values. Many are justified, are on racial, religious, and political grounds, and they benefit those who are wealthy and powerful. And the Special Rapporteur on the situation of human rights in occupied Palestinian territories has documented how corporations and commercial interests have enabled and profited from the occupation of Palestine. And she points out how they are complicit in human rights violations. Now, all of these processes, I believe, have failed women. And a very crucial aspect of this problem here is the move from multilateralism to multi-stakeholderism, which is coming because of increased corporate influence over global governance. And this has become the new normal, and it's institutionalized in the UN system through the SDGs, what are the Sustainable Development Goals, through the UN Food System Summit. And many UN agencies have corporate partnerships because governments who should be paying their dues are not paying them. Markets are ruling. So governments aren't paying their dues. China actually has paid its full dues now. So it's thank you very much, China. But many of the wealthy countries, the former colonizers, are not paying their dues.
Shall, 1 minute.
Yes. And I would just like to say that multilateralism, I think, has been ethically and materially corrupted by multi-stakeholderism. So human rights and women's rights have been subservient to market and financial interests, and governments now can abdicate their own obligations of upholding the public interest in human rights. And one of the most dangerous and insidious aspects of this multi-stakeholderism is how it ostensibly gives voice to people, especially women, youth, peasants, because what the multi-stakeholder, how we say, interests, who are mostly corporations and their business associations, are doing is in the name of women's empowerment and women's voice in regional multilateral governance spaces. They are creating these parallel structures, which I think also was referred to by Preeti earlier. So I'll stop here and I'll save my comments for later. Thank you.
Thank you, Shal. So I think both our speakers have essentially set a frame where they show, one, that multilateral institutions, of course, reflects, because it's a collection of states generally, one set of multilateral institutions. The other, like BRICS, etc., also reflect states, but they're not part of the formal UN system or the Bretton Woods system. So there's a different kind of space there. So, and as both the speakers have very rightly said, that there's already a framework of patriarchy which dominates these institutions, and women have had to struggle not only just to make space, but to get some concessions. And third, now they are facing a dual backlash. Because these institutions have been so dominated by those who created these institutions just post World War II, when there was a Western domination, and much of us in the global South had been either colonized for a long time or just getting our freedoms or getting decolonized, and some remained colonized for another 10, 15 years. We were not, we were not the rule makers. And now, when there is a rise again of primacy and domination and the rise of right wing, women are facing even a greater backlash and new forms of patriarchy, including from other women sometimes who have interest now in the financialized system. So with this very brief summing up, I would like to open the floor very briefly for a few questions or comments, and then we go on to our next two speakers.
Thank you, Anu. I'm waiting for our audience to share their thoughts in the chat. But while they do so, I just wanted to also just highlight that in these multilateralism, including the ones which are emerging from global south, like or BRICS, say, or ASEAN, etc., they are not very different in terms of how gender is integrated and how women's leadership needs are recognized. At best, they look at it, either they'll create a separate vertical. So we have, take for example, within the UN agency, we have UN Women, we might have the Women 20 within the G20, and the larger or the main dominated discourse around policy, etc., continue to be in a very tokenistic representation of gender. And so the horizontal integration of gender within these systems, we have not seen over the years as Sharmali alluded to this fact that gender is seen as a soft issue or less important, where the way it's justified in the interest of, say, security or blah, 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 economic growth is big one, that gender always becomes one which is given lesser of a status or is almost forgotten. So I just wanted to highlight that. I'm again encouraging everyone from our audience, please do share. I know I see many of you with extensive experience in this field, and we would love to hear your thoughts and comments. But I just had, while we again wait for others to share in their thought, Lucy, if I may ask you, I think it was really great to hear your presentation about China's approach. How do you see it? Like you talked about, and you gave a 3-point this in terms of including women from all backgrounds in and recognizing indigenous knowledge. How do you see China's approach different from, say, our northern countries or past colonizers in their development policy, where they have said so far included gender, but women get included either as a beneficiary or as a victim, but never recognized as a full integrated participant, as a full agent, and in her own rights to be on these policy table and in decision making spaces. So Lucy, if you can share a little bit about China in that aspect, that would be great. While I keep encouraging our audience to.
You have to unmute, Lucy.
Yeah. Because my study field for Pacific Island countries, and this is more oriented study field. But when we talk about Pacific Island countries, we must know Australia, New Zealand, and Oceania, and then also Asia Pacific, and also ASEAN countries, and of course the rest of the world. So I compare with especially on the women issue. What I answer to Pretty was the difference between the China approach to the gender issue, women's gender issue, with other. I just compare with Pacific Island countries. That's the difference. I think the most important one key issue is the China and Pacific Island countries. They are both them. They are under colonized for a long time. But when China get independent, it is independent. It's not including Commonwealth. It's not including Commonwealth, but Pacific Island countries, they are even now still in Commonwealth. So the Pacific Island countries, the government policies, especially for women's gender, they are not really independent. So this is cannot be, if you want to change the situation, you have to change the whole political mechanism. for the colonized, and might be in future. See, Australia, New Zealand also, they want this coupling to the British the Commonwealth. So might be another 10 or 20 years, the Oceania countries, they are be really independent. So for women gender issue, their policy will be absolutely independent. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much, Lucy. We have a comment, a question from Gurjeet Kaur. I'll just read it out, and either one of the panelists can respond. Is multi-stakeholderism possible with centrality of state in international relation and multilateralism? What are your thoughts on the possibility of pluralistic, inclusive state being the basis of multi-stakeholderist multilateralism? Or there is a possibility of bypassing the primacy of states and dominance of security in international relations? This probably, Shalmali, it's perhaps
Sure.
your...
Yeah. Well, okay. I think I mean, the premise that I would start on this issue is trying to understand what we mean by stakeholders and who are stakeholders, right? Are stakeholders the same as rights holders? And this is not just an argument about language, but the idea of, for example, stakeholders, if we look at how the World Bank or the Asian Development Bank or many of these international financial institutions refer to them, they say their definition is usually any actor, any body that has an interest in something, in an issue, or is engaged or involved in some way, whether it's through financing or through being there and so on. So one of the things that multi-stakeholder approaches do not recognize and do not address are the power asymmetries and the power imbalances among the different people who are supposed to be stakeholders. We've seen this very very clearly when we look at, there are these multi-stakeholder processes in, say, for large dams or for sustainable soy, sustainable palm oil. They're all multi-stakeholder processes, the UN Food System Summit, and so on. Now, if you put a peasant woman who has never left her village, or a small-scale fisherwoman who's worked in her own area, next to a wealthy business person, and a bunch of government people, and then a bunch of well-heeled NGOs, no? I mean, and they say this, and this is a multi-stakeholder dialogue on, say, the future of food or the future of fish. I mean, this is, in my view, a completely bizarre situation, because the people who are most affected and most deeply vulnerable in this situation don't have the same level of power, and capacity as the others around the table do. So I think multi-stakeholderism in and of itself has a lot of political problems which need to be addressed. Now, that said, in international relations, if there are genuinely pluralistic states, and there are governments, there are powers that be at different levels, whether it's at the subnational level or at the international level, because in international relations, all of these will count, who will make that space, who will prepare the rights holders, who governments must answer to. And I think this is where I think the difference between a stakeholder and rights holder is extremely important, which has become blurred by finance capital and economic and financial globalization. No? So if there are states and governments who genuinely create that space and prioritize their rights holders, there is, I think, a good chance that in international relations, we could make a multi-stakeholder process work by bringing groups around the table. But we cannot ignore power imbalances. And yes, it's true, we have many criticisms of states, we have many criticisms of governments, but that is the system we have now. I'm not an I'm not an advocate of anarchy in this situation. So I think there is a relationship between people and their governments. There is a level, there's a position, there's a relationship of accountability that must be held. And a very key part of this accountability is dismantling patriarchy and actually building the agency and autonomy of women, not wealthy women, not women who only have professional background, but those who actually, grow the food in the world, who look after the children of the world, who produce the wealth of this world. So, I hope Gurjit, I have responded to your question, but I'd be happy to discuss this further separately. Sorry.
Thanks so much, Shalmali. As you speak, as BRICS Feminist Watch, one of the areas we do work on is monitoring the South-based IFI, particularly the New Development Bank and the AIIB, ADB, etc., as well as the African Development Bank. It's whether you call it how, knowing very well as feminists how limited our space is. One of the things we raise in terms of making sure women are engaged in consultations and there is meaningful consultation, they are informed, and then this happens. But what we are up against, what the bank does, is a checklist approach, of course. And they will show us that, see, so many women we consulted and this it is, and it's absolutely meaningless. You go and you talk to the women on the ground, they have no idea what they and the bank will project as a stakeholder engagement is exactly what you said, and it doesn't go beyond the checklist approach. But thanks so much. Anu, I'm going to hand it over to you for phase 2. And we'll again have time for this interaction after the two panelists.
Yeah, thank you. So we have our next really wonderful speaker, Mariama Williams, who's from both Jamaica and the US. And she's a very powerful feminist voice, I would say. So Mariama, the floor is yours, yeah?
Yeah, good morning, good afternoon, good night. It's always wonderful to be part of anything that BRICS Feminist Watch does. So no matter what's going on, I make sure I can participate. You must all know that I'm participating with a very heavy heart because what has happened to my lovely country and my fellow citizens, of which we haven't fully reconciled. Even some of my own family I'm not hearing from, but have word that some of them are without electricity and power. So this is where we are, and we know that this is a result of the perversity and the strength of the hurricane is a result of climate change and other factors, political factors that are not being acknowledged. The fact that the U.S. now has a number of nuclear class submarines and at least thousands of troops in the Caribbean archipelago. I'm not a climate scientist, but I cannot imagine that that doesn't have anything to do with stirring up the heat in the Atlantic and so forth. But all of these things will come later on when people get unafraid of speaking truth to power. All right, so the presentations so far have been very, very powerful, and I thank you very much. It's great to see good friends, longtime feminists here, who I haven't seen in many, many years. I want to talk a little bit about the political economy of multilateralism, looking at the old vectors and new vectors, the kind of shifts, contradictions that have happened, and what does it mean in terms of the future for gender, race, and ecology. So we're going to look at the power vectors and how we are redefining multilateralism. I've heard a lot of different expressions of multilateralism here. But the next era we know must be grounded in feminist, Afro-Descendant, and ecological framework that places care, justice, and planetary well-being at the heart of international corporations. And I use those phrases in quote. What we now know is that the legacies of the old world order intersects with the unstable realities of the present, right? But we can identify the dominant vectors, the structures of continuity, and the emergent ones, such as what Lee's talking about and others with BRICS and China. That signals reform or transformation, depending on your perspective, In any event, a lot of what's going on provide a strategic opening through which feminist, Afro-Descendant, and ideological frameworks can reshape the next multilateral era, however we look at it. I want to quickly kind of run through where we are and where we're coming from, so we have some sense of that. And I don't have time to go into depth, so it's going to be very schematic, because I think we need to go back to look at the question of sovereignty and the silences that has pervaded. You know, we started our as South people orientation into this global thing around this Westphalian notion, right? Which has the principle of territorial sovereignty, judicial equality of states, non-intervention in domestic affairs. And that was a breakthrough of order among European states. And it fixed a static-centric ontology of world politics, which left out people without states, colonized territories, enslaved population, indigenous nation, and women as political subjects. We were not part of that settlement. And as scholars such as Siba Grovicki and Sylvia Winter have argued, human protected by sovereignty was racialized, gendered, and European. So from a feminist perspective, this Westphalian entrenched a patriarchal, property-based model of authority and sovereignty, and imagined as a masculine control over territory, bodies, and border. And from an Afrocentric perspective, it was deeply hypocritical, mildly to say, because even as Europe affirmed non-intervention among themselves, they massively intervened, enslaved, and extracted in the Caribbean and the Americas and Africa. Then we transition into this liberal order of the 20th century, right? The liberal promise of free trade, open seas, rule-based cooperation. But these promises exist with colonial domination. And international law distinguished between, quote, civilized and, unquote, civilized people. Formal sovereignty was granted selectively. So we entered the post-war period of the Bretton Woods, where we have this notion of embedded liberalism after the Great Depression. System was called by John Ruggie embedded liberalism. And the idea was to combine open international economy with domestic social protection and capital control. And the IMF and the World Bank and the GATT were created to stabilize this compromise. Yet again, it was an order largely written by and for the North. Most colonized societies were not at the table. Women were not present. We sought agency through the various UN conferences. And many states were proper to a point of decolonization, and our states gained juridical sovereignty, but we entered an international economy structured around northern industrial dominance, commodity dependence, and technological gap. And that's a contradiction that many Southern thinkers have been wrestling with. Then we get to 1955, we got the Bandung Conference and the critique, right? And the attempt to articulate an alternative multilateralism that was anti-colonial, anti-racist, and pro-development. But even these Southern initiatives were heavily masculinized. Women's leadership and gender equality were endorsed rhetorically, but rarely institutionalized. In Latin America, we had the structuralists from Prebisch all the way to Amin to Emmanuel that provided a theoretical grammar to explain why multilateralism kept reproducing hierarchy. So this center-periphery structure, unequal exchange, the drain of surplus. And Amin obviously called for delinking. And that was precisely about reclaiming policy space from these multilateral constraints. In Africa and Caribbean, we had Nkrumah, theory of neocolonialism, Walter Rodney, historical materials account of underdevelopment. And all of these various critiques by Afro-Descendant feminists showed that gendered and racial labor, domestic work, plantation labor, care work, market vending, was the invisible infrastructure of the world order. And it continues to be. So we entered the 1980s with neoliberal globalization and the hollowing out of sovereignty. So the debt crisis of the 1980s, coupled with the ideological rise of the Washington Consensus, which was the theology, produced a short term away from the embedded liberalism. So through the IMF and the World Bank Structural Adjustment Program, states in Latin America and the Caribbean and South Asia were pressed to privatize, liberalize, cut social spending, and reorient towards export-led growth. This was a final hollowing out of the Westphalian sovereignty. So states retained formal sovereignty, but lost substantive economic policy space. And we see in the work of scholars, so feminist scholars such as Diane Ellison, Lourdes Benera, and Asha George, that structural adjustment externalize the crisis to household, to women who absorb the cuts through unpaid care work, informal work, and migration. So neoliberal multilateralism intensified both social reproduction and ecological crisis. And in between, somewhere we had the R2P, responsible to protect, right? There that you protect states, protect people and states who are enduring genocide, war crimes, ethnic cleansing, and crime against humanity. But however, as we know, that was applied unevenly, even though we have critique of it, but even in its implementation, it was uneven. We saw the intervention in Libya. We saw Syria today. We see the failure to out the devastation and the murder of innocent Gazans, right? Which confirms what many African, South African, Arab, and Palestinian feminists have argued, that without decolonizing the Security Council and depoliticizing veto powers, our lives will not be protected will be selective. So here we go. We're now in a, what people call a crisis or the fractured multilateral order, where the three forces are converging: the financial crisis of 2008, the rise of China under the Southern power, and the escalating climate, pandemic, and debt crisis. This is what we're calling the crisis of multilateralism. Western-led institutions face legitimacy deficit. And at the same time, we have the rise of Southern platform, BRICS, AU, G20, CELAC, ASEAN, SCO are expanding. But as Patrick Bonden, as Eduardo Goodnas, and Samvas caution, Southern platforms can reproduce extractivist, patriarchal, and corporate-friendly logic unless they're deliberately grounded in feminist, Afro-Descendant, ecological justice framework. Gaza, alongside the protracted crisis in Sudan and DRC and Afghanistan, has become a litmus test of the international order's moral credibility. I'm arguing that they fail functionally, neoliberalism failed functionally and morally, right? When mass civilian suffering is not met with consistent protection, then who are we? And we see that right now in the Caribbean with the demands. I call it a demand. They say the US government will say they've sent a letter of request to the state of Grenada that they invaded in 1980 to request that Grenada give them permission to put bases and to locate US military. Now, in no sense in any part of the world could that be a request that Grenada has a reasonable chance of denying and saying no. We've seen the fracture of the relationship around this militarization of the Caribbean. So the post-war militarization really has been a setup to protect global accumulation. The IMF, the World Bank, and all the related agencies, including some of our UN friends, right? The boundaries of legitimacy and expertise is about protecting global accumulation, right? But even those, so that multilateralism has performed a dual function. It has reproduced social relations and sustained global inequality. So we need to move forward, and I don't have time to go into it. I just wanted to trace that through, and then quickly, because I know I only have the 7 minutes, but I just want to flag that this racial capitalism and the search for epistemic justice has been there from CLR James in the Caribbean, from Claudia Jones to Sylvia Winter, Angela Davis, and contemporary Afro-Latin American scholars who link slavery, colonialism, and modern finance into one continuous system of racial capitalism. So the plantation become the prototype for today's supply chains. Extract debt, policy continue, the patterns on the new name, and we have a global governance system that still operates through racialized valuation. Who counts? Whose knowledge matter? Whose suffering is visible and whose suffering is not, right? So where do we go? Right? Path toward a feminist ecological multilateralism, right? If we want to keep the terminology, whatever it is, I'm thinking of international cooperation. It has provided a site for us as global feminists to be able to bring our points of view and our metrics and our thoughts in. So whatever it is, this new, quote, multilateralism must redistribute voice, resource, and knowledge, and link towards a feminist ecological multilateralism. All right, we have to have definancialized development. We have to repair and invest, tying debt restructuring and debt forgiveness to gender budget floors and ecological restoration and community. Not this stuff that the World Bank is pushing, carbon-based, market-based thing. That's another green extractionism, and we have to really talk about that. We need pluralized knowledge that grounded indigenous, Afro-Descendant, and feminist epistemology, and where the measure is by care, integrated in whatever we're going to call it, GDP-centric performance, indicators of well-being, safety. So the feminist ecological multilateralism, what I think it was Eduardo talked about, a pluriverse, multilateral pluriverse, right, has to be about not just stability, but sustainability, equity, not efficiency, but care, not control, but relational, right? So putting all this together, Westphalian's exclusion, dependence, theory of structural insight, Afro-Descendant account of racialized capitalism, feminist analysis of social reproduction, and ecological critiques of extractivism, we can say the problem is not simply that multilateralism has left women out. The problem is that the global order has been built on gendered, racialized, and ecological dispossession. And a transformative agenda must therefore redistribute power and decision-making, redistribute resources through debt, tax, and climate finance justice, protect civic and digital space for women and Afro-Descendant. And I haven't even gotten into the digitalization of the global space yet, and the control of many of our government by Starlink, which is a very dangerous thing. That means that the US government, in the form of one that we know has the willingness and the power, can shut off many of our systems just on a decree, right? Because we're now back to the 19th century kingdom. So in terms of my epilogue, let's talk about the geometry of our hope, right? We have the institutional are fracturing, the treaties are fraying, certainties are dissolving, and some of that is good. Yet history reminds us that every collapse carries within it the architect of rebirth. Multilateralism was never only a system of state, it was a longing for cooperation, for safety, for belonging in a vast and uneven world. So from the Westphalian bounded sovereignty to today's planetary fragility, we have witnessed a long apprenticeship in separation. But what if the next chapter is not about control, but connection? What if sovereignty could mean the right to breathe clean air, to live without fear, to care, and be cared for across borders? So the real frontier of world order is not territorial, but relation, between peoples, gender, generation, and the earth itself. And I'll stop there.
Thank you, Mariana, as powerful as always. And now we look forward to listening to Felisa Nakomo. She was involved right now in drafting some G20 proposals. So straight out of one multilateral meeting into discussing the issue over here. Felisa, the floor is yours.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you and see you.
Excellent. All right, thank you so much, Feminists of Global South. I truly appreciate this opportunity. And I stepped in, I actually heard almost all the input that was presented by the previous speaker. But I just want to make several points in the 8 minutes that I've been allocated, where we actually really need to start paying attention to. I think firstly, we must really reflect on the type of global multilateral crisis that we're confronted right now. And the fact that we're seeing, in fact, actions of delegitimization of multilateral institutions. I mean, the second issue I want to make is that we need to pay attention to the fact that the delegitimization will not benefit Global South, but also it will worsen our position. So that's something that we need to pay attention to. And I want to link that with the point of the fact that, in fact, from the word go, the whole idea of multilateralism is about collaboration and integration of nations and finding common ground with each other and where there are areas of contestation. So therefore, if the institutions unto which are meant to hold these collaborations, integrations, and conversation and finding common grounds are undermined, what will happen to the Global South and specifically women? And I think for me, we just need to think about imagining a world where we have no multilateral institutions that actually exist. The other 3 points that I think that we must not stop, and I think the previous speaker really sits on it very well around the international financial architecture and how also these multilateral institutions have kind of like really entrenched the hierarchies that are embedded, in particular Africa, where Africa's really been seen as a junior partner in the multilateralism space, and obviously across the Global South. So what should be the feminist thinking around that? Is that first is that patriarchy tends to turn a blind eye towards women's issues, and they view the expertise and the strength of women as inadequate to participate in that space. I think that's the first issue. I think ignorance tends to take over and overshadow the perceptions of women who are occupying leadership spaces. But also, we also know that how the gender dividend has also been used as well to undermine the very struggle of feminists, where women were not ready to take on leadership positions, are put up into senior positions of power at a global level so that they can make mistakes, and so that they would then, patriarch will then come back and say, look at the mistakes that these people are actually making, women are making. I think the issue around Global South, and especially their vulnerability around unequal gendered impacts of climate change. I think we're facing COP17, and I think as feminists, we must take an intersectional outlook on all these global events. I mean, we just come out of the G20 meeting now. I mean, a draft. We already know what are the areas of contestation, and climate change is already coming out as one of the area that is going to be a massive area of contestation, because President Trump had called it a con job during the UNGA. So we need to pay attention to that. I think several demands that we must really make is, firstly, is the promotion of the principles of feminist foreign policy that are very intersectional by nature, promoting human rights, but also two, ensuring that financial and other resources are allocated in advance for gender equity. And I know we say equality, but for gender equity, which then begins to understand the discourse unto which and the differences unto which several women are coming from. The third one is around increasing the representation of women in decision making. And I think the emphasis I'm making around equity versus equality is to really create spaces for women to be exposed in complex debates a lot more earlier in their lives. I don't want to say training, leadership training, because I think women are overtrained. We're just one group that is overtrained comparing to anyone else. So I do think that it's an exposure it's appetite for risk, allowing women to make mistakes when they're in leadership positions, because they are often quite punitive measures that are actually imposed on women when they make mistakes. But I think also part of that as well, identify resourcing and supporting women when they are being exposed. I mean, for instance, just as a simple example, you think about the shrinking funding for women to participate in global conversation, even before they are in leadership position. There's just no funding for them to travel to in an African context in an AU or regional meetings, etc. And that exposure is actually important because then you're building a second layer, a leadership. I think the other point that I want to really make as part of something that we need to pay attention to is around ensuring that we're able to collaborate and build structures that reflect on the discourse of where we are. Amongst those, today's conversation must really be about what has been the outcome of IMF and World Bank, and whether does it really address the issues that we're about. What has been the outcome of UNGA? Whether does it really addresses the issue that we're about. I think the other one is around really regional security issues. We need to pay attention to that, and as well as fundamentally also talk about issues of economic inclusion, because there's a direct link between multilateralism and economic exclusion of women, and strengthen institutions that are already pursuing the inclusion at a national level, at a regional level, but also at the same time really advocate for a political system at a national level and at a regional level. Political system that supports women's participation in mainstream politics. Because as long as also women are in the periphery of politics, we're not going to be able to see a change within a multilateralism thinking. We're always going to end up with technocrats who have studied international relations, who are pursuing a particular agenda, but also who are not grounded in political nuanced and a clear political agenda that seeks to advance gender equity. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, both Mariama and Felisa. And I think you have underlined and shown really that how care work held by women provides the material base for the entire structure of the international and national and local systems, but yet remains invisibilized. And that is the basis of patriarchy today, which continues. So we really need a new kind of social contract, because women have been left out of the way the social contract of these multilateral institutions were constructed. First, even the Global South was left out, but now that countries of the Global South are demanding a voice, the new institutions that they are producing, whether it's BRICS, SCO, etc., again, while they would have some voices of the Global South, but it's primarily of men of the Global South. So women continue to struggle for a space even within these new institutions. So really, we would open the floor for question and answers now, and then give all the speakers another minute or so to either ask each other questions or have a discussion or conclude. That's where we are. I think we have about another 15 to 18 minutes for the Q&A and discussion. So Preeti?
Thanks, Anu. Thank you so much. I think it was so rich. There were so many critical points which we can go, but I quickly want to take what Mise from South Africa has shared in the chat, and is asking what are the best practices for promoting women's representation and leadership in multilateral institutions. Do we have, I know we are so critical as feminists, but are there good examples of women's leadership and practices in these institutions, if anyone would like to share? Mariama and Felisa, any do you want to give any
Yes.
examples?
Yes, I would like to, and maybe Mariama can add. I mean, one of the key issues, women must embed themselves in organizations that are pursuing political and social discourse. Because then in essence, that really becomes a space and a learning ground to acquire knowledge. I think that's the first issue. And then the second one, obviously, it's important to pay attention into both your national politics, regional politics, and global politics. And I think the third one is to also really feminist spaces to be created like this one, right? Where they really share and reflect so that you actually build a groundswell of critical thinking amongst women who rise into position of power. We know that women who we experience that, in fact, women who rise into position of power in mainstream politics, and to which patriarchy is highly is the craft of how to run several organizations. Women are really silenced. They have no voice in the system, but also they are also fighting lonely battles as well, by the way, right? Because also feminist organizations outside are also quite fractured. We never provide a space to say, can we be the confidantes? Come and reflect to us around the complexities of being leadership, right? So part of it is to really create those spaces. I mean, the other one really, if you're a member of parliament, is to also create the spaces around women's caucuses. So it's difficult to say you will grow and become a women leader in a multilateral institution when you've become a professional, because multilateral institution, by the way, by design, neutralizes people. I've seen it, where women would rise in the position of power, robust, with a strong feminist orientation. But as soon as they hit a multilateral institution, they completely become neutral. Even the language changes. And let alone the fact that they're not available. They won't take your calls after that. And part of it as well is because they are always alone. They don't have people who are supporting them outside. So in essence, if they take on a feminist agenda in a global institution, they don't know if things become tough, they have anyone else to run. So we also need, so in essence, and I think for me, is that I think it's really collaborative approaches and making sure that you really expose yourself, and reading and writing and publishing and participate in these spaces is one of the, and I'm not saying that this is the only one, but I suppose there are always going to be regional, national, and dynamics that inform how women really participate in the space.
Thanks, Felisa. Mariama, do you want to add to this on?
Yeah, I actually don't have much to add. I think Felisa has a lot more experience in working in these contexts. I have very little, and even less the last couple of years. But so I agree fully with her. And I think part of the what have been the detriment of our current crop of women leaders, and I have some in my mind at the moment, is that they don't bring with them a team of advisor. And they are sometimes ashamed or embarrassed to say that I have connection to civil society and to women's group. They don't let that be known that they have a power base, right? And your power base is who nominated you, who were part of that. Once they get in, they kind of, as you were saying, shut the door. And that's to their detriment.
Brilliant.
If males know that they have a power base and they have direct connection and they're maintaining their connection to civil society groups, that's a different story. And I think it'd be a lot better for them. The other thing is, I think women's group also on the outside have been shying away from this question of macroeconomics and trade, which is underlying every possible thing that we could do. We talk about food, housing. If you don't grapple with the macroeconomic issue and the trade issue, not that you have to be in depth in it, but you need to network with others who are doing it and know how who you need to call to get varying perspective on it, whether it's heterodox or feminist perspective. So when you're shaping your policies, you have a set of people who can give you position paper and research that you can actually present and talk to. I've seen it happen as a consultant to various institutions, that women are flailing, and they're then marginalized. That, oh, she's just about gender, because they don't have the connectivity to other issue unless it's their particular bellowalk. So I think really getting ourselves to be more knowledgeable about that. And I think I see more of it. I see the younger generation more of it. I see a lot of group now looking at macroeconomics and economic policy issues and integrating it into whether it's climate justice, trade justice, tax justice. And that's a wonderful thing. But I just caution these young people, because they're going to be rising, they're going to be recruited into institutions, to avoid what Felicia has talked about, which is to go in as this individual on your own merit. Yes, you're brilliant. We know that. But the thing is, the space was open. Often the door was pushed open, and somebody's foot has been keeping that door for you to get in. And you cannot forget that and go in and close the door, because you may rise, but there come a time when you will be marginalized. And that's not the time to be reaching out to civil society. Right. So I think keeping that, having a network and having it known, and be proud that you have this network of rigorous gender analysis, rigorous feminist analysis that you can call at any moment, should be something that you should carry with you. And I'm saying that for the younger generation. The other people like us are already in tune with their life, and But I think, yeah, I don't have much else to. I think this is that time period that presents a lot of crystallization of things. That if we're confused about it, we can no longer be confused. Because one of the things that I say, the only good thing from Trump is that he's actually teared the curtain right open, and all the hypocrisies of the EU, Australia, Canada, all of it is wide open now. So what do we want to try to, our leaders like to try to fool themselves? They cannot fool themselves anymore. It's very clear. It's out there, right? This boogeyman and all the things about no one left behind. You're leaving entire slates of population behind, gleefully so. And you're seeing them back into their role as providing services for the North or for the US or for the EU. The EU is doing the same thing that Trump is doing it. They call it strategic autonomy, right? They're doing the same exact thing in WTO. They don't go around like Trump and stay. But go look at the EU policy. Look at the EU green strategic mineral policy. Look at the negotiations they're doing with African countries. What's the difference? Huh? All right, I'm gonna stop.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mariama. I think we have a lot, but I wanted to also give few minutes to Shalmali as well as Lucy. If you want to add your way forward and recommendation, or respond to any of the other presenters or the questions that were raised. So, Lucy, do you want to get us started, and then Shalmali can...
Okay. Can I just share interesting situation in Pacific Island countries? Might be you people not really familiar with Pacific Island countries. I was in the Kingdom of Tonga for 8 years. What I found for even for the women itself or its family, very powerful, but still in the whole government or whole country, the whole women's position still not equal. For example, in Pacific Island countries, the third, the Tonga, the third king of Tonga is a woman. And I think he's the first king, the women king in the whole world. In Tonga, the third king. When she was ruling Tonga, she's so powerful, even ruling to very much powerful for the influence to other Pacific Island countries. And then, for the last former prime minister in Samoa, he's also a lady. The president of Kiribati, the former president of Kiribati, she's also a lady. But I also heard story about sometimes the title, the successor from her husband, her father, and succeeds to the daughter, the elder daughter, can succeed to the title of the Grand Chief. But the lady will not take the title, but give the title, the grand chief, to the husband, to let a husband running into government position. So what this situation, I think I would to say, even in you are the grand chief for a lady, even you are grand chief, you are the king of women king, but still in the whole society, in the whole country, in the whole region, the whole world, the women still not equality. So even they got the success, got the grand chief, the title, she has to forward to her husband to running, as the take the role of the title of the chief. Lady still shows her weak and not much acceptable by the society. This is what I want to share with you.
Thank you, Lucy. Shalmali, I just also, in your response, if there is one question which Ananya Dasgupta has posted, how can multilateralism cause a cultural shift in patriarchal countries where women are considered inferior to men? If you can take that and also give us your thoughts on way forward or a feminist vision. Thank you, Lucy.
Thank you. Okay. I think as feminists, we have to ensure that there are certain values that are not compromised by relativism, whether it's social, cultural, religious relativism. And I think we need to be always very conscious of this whole intersection of different types of oppression, which are unwittingly advanced through South-South language. And I know on one hand, all of us here are sort of militating against, how do we say, the intellectual, quote unquote, or political hegemony of the West, who are the colonizers, who in the past and continue to be. But let's not forget that that thinking has also become imbibed in our own societies. To be under a colonial power and to be oppressed by an enemy for a long time, it's a survival instinct, when how do you say, our minds and our systems become colonized. And if you look across the global South, our political economic systems haven't really broken free from a number of, shall we say, colonial constructs. But that said, while I would argue very strongly for the South to be charting its own path, I think it's a big mistake for us to go relativistic on this issue. So there are definitely values that I would not compromise on, on terms of gender equality, feminism, and so on. And I think this is one of the things that happens in the multilateral system. There's a lot of relativism,
Yes.
In the name of respecting sovereignty, respecting culture, et cetera, completely forgetting that women make up more than half the world's population. And we women ourselves absorb those because it's in our comfort zones in many ways. It's there with gender, it's there with sexuality, it's there with all the other intersections that we see. So this is one response that I would say, that I think as feminists, we have to be quite firm on some values. And as a Southern feminist, I will still maintain certain universal values of equality. And so, all of them really. And I would hold the North, and I would hold the West and the East and North, South, every axis against those values, because I think we women have to find ways to be together and support each other, all of us can't be certain types of feminists, but we can certainly be, how shall we say, supportive feminists for each other, as Felisa was also, and Mariama and others have pointed out. Okay, so that's one thing. The second thing I'd like to say in closing is that, I don't think multilateralism can benefit with women without structural change and systemic transformation. So for me, a feminist approach to multilateralism requires a sort of a radical rupture of the patriarchal oligarchic systems that dominate the world. I think incremental reforms will trap us further in systems that we will be forced to defend because we participate in them. So let's not dig our own graves. Let's not make our own coffins, no? Of course, radical rupture is complex and difficult. And I'm not saying that we're going to talk about another big class revolution and all that. That's not going to happen. But I think when we look at the way the world's going, with sort of patriarchal oligarchies, I think there needs to be a lot more consciousness raising among our own ranks as feminists and as women, a lot more empathy and support with each other, so that we can actually find practical solutions to come out of it. And I think we should take these into the multilateral spaces and challenge power as much as we can. I don't think we should be scared of that, because I think there are a lot of men and women in these systems who are probably looking for support from us, and perhaps would welcome it. I also think that South-South cooperation has to move beyond these very tired development models and reproduction of the North-South domination. Just the same way feminism and gender equality has to guard against reproducing patriarchal power hierarchies. I don't think flipping the power hierarchies helps us. For me, that's not what feminism at least is about, no? It's about changing the world in a very different way. And I also think finally that while we're thinking of South-South cooperation, I mean, look at the countries that we're in now. We're in southern countries. How many of our regimes are actually regimes that we would support? Just human beings. I mean, seriously, so let's be straightforward here. But then there are many regimes in the north that we wouldn't support either. So I think we need to transgress these boundaries in a more, I don't know, I guess, progressive feminist way. And I also think that transformation of multilateralism to make it gender equal has to start from the national levels. I think regionalism and multilateralism should not be an out or a way that we don't challenge the enemy at the national level. I'll just stop here. I don't know if I responded to the questions.
Yes, no, you gave a lot of insights and a lot to think about for sure. I'm so sorry we ran out of time. I feel we've just started the conversation and we should probably think about phase 2 of this discussion. But Anu, I will give it to you if you want to just add your thoughts also before we close.
Okay, so I think this has been an extremely rich webinar, and there's so much that I think all of us and I personally have gained from listening to all four speakers, a lot of new ideas, and especially of how we move forward. But I think some of the key takeaways are that we need to have a new gendered social contract. The old social contract on the basis of which multilateralism has been constructed, we were not part of it as women, as feminists, etc. So that social contract has to be a gendered social contract that has to be renewed or rebuilt completely. And that can only be based on a system change. Otherwise, if it's the same system operating, the system of not fully decolonized thinking, there is a possibility of repeating some of the earlier issues. So within that, I think this definancialized development, a pluralized knowledge, the integration of the caretaking world, the pluriverse, as we call it now, and not control, but connection and a collaborative approach. And lastly, I would say just one thing. While as feminists, we want women's equality and equity in everywhere, everywhere in all institutions, women should be represented. At the same time, we as feminists, we should also say that we need to distinguish now between just the women issue and the feminist issue, because a feminist issue would be one
Absolutely.
where we do not,
Absolutely.
where the bottom line should be, we are not harming other women. We should not be part of a system which endorses our own national interest of being part of a system which harms other women, whether it's a feminist foreign policy or being part of a multilateral institution. But at the same time, we have to speak out against what's, for example, happening in Gaza, whether we're in the north or the south, or east or west, or whether we are women or feminists or non-feminists. On issues like that, and oppose these masculinized foreign policies wherever they are, in the north or south, etc. And I think that's where I will close with my comments. Thank you.
Thanks, Anu. I share, it was so rich. I learned so much. And I also, I think, would honestly like to share that when I heard the presenters as well as Anu, you, I think it provided clarity. These were thoughts as feminists we have struggled but didn't have clarity how to piece it together and not get caught in the system that we are trying to be critical of, but not knowing how to actually rupture and to think outside it. So I really appreciate all the insights that were shared by various panelists in providing that clarity and that empowering each one of us that we can think beyond this and make it happen. That I think is phenomenal for me. So I want to thank all the panelists. I want to thank who stayed beyond our allotted time, our audience, with the engagement. And I want to recognize Anu. Thank you so much for helping us moderate and bringing such good insights. Vishnu, thank you for anchoring all the behind the scene logistics. If you want to quickly turn your camera on so everyone can see. Big thank you, Vishnu, for all that you do behind the scene and making this possible. So thank you. Wonderful. I am so, inspired. And before I got here, I was feeling frustrated and angry, but now I feel I think there is a possible feminist collective vision that we march together forward. So thank you so much.